I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you are going to learn something today. I am so excited to be able to bring you the results of my latest round of Fat Shark module testing. I've put so much work into this one, and I've got so many modules to test, and it's the best test I've done so far. The modules I've got to test include LaForge, TrueD, both the new 3.5 hardware and the older 3.0 hardware. I've got the HUKIYA from HolyBro. I've got the real ACC module with the new ACHILLES firmware. If you haven't seen this, it's amazing. I'm going to have a separate video coming out about that, but we're going to see how it performs in the air anyway. I've got the Fat Shark ATTITUDEV4 with their OLED module, and and the Amway Commander as well, although that's not exactly a Fat Shark module, but you get the drift. I can't wait to bring you this video. Stay tuned, seriously. Folks, I'm not going to beat around the bush very much. I'm going to get right to the results because if there's anything I've learned from my previous rounds of testing, it's that no matter what I think about the results, half of the people are going to go disagree with me. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The other one was clearly better. And you're like, no, are you kidding me? This one, and I don't really care if you agree with me about who won. All I care about is that you get the data you need to make a decision about what product you want to buy. So here's how this video is going to shape up. Number one, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of how I set up the test rig. I've got a completely different way of running this testing. I want you to see I put a lot of work into it to try to get the most valid test results ever. And I'm not being hyperbolic there. I sincerely mean it. So I'm going to walk you through how I set up the test rig, and then you all can decide about all the things I did wrong. But continuous improvement. That's what we're going for here. Then I'm going to show you the results, and you can decide for yourself what you think of them in as much detail as you want. Then I'm going to show you as best I could, I came up with a quantitative, a numerical, a rigorous way of deciding which module did better. But you can form your own opinions before I get to that, and then you can decide that that's all full of shit. But you could check it out. And then finally, stick around to the end because I am going to give you some final thoughts about these modules and these things. Suffice it to say, you shouldn't necessarily just pick the one that has the best number or the best, because there's other factors that come into play, and I'll tell you about those. But now, let me get to the next section of the video. I'm going to give you a little walk around the test rig so you can see how I have attempted to remove all possible confounding variables that might result in criticism of my results, you bastards. So the first thing I want to show you is I've got all identical antennas, and they're all set up exactly in a row, all aimed the same direction. Some have criticized that these antennas are too close together and might affect each other in some way. There might be some validity to that, but the alternative is having them so far apart that they don't necessarily, eventually they're so far apart that they're not reading the same thing, so I'm trying to kind of split the difference there. I feel like they're not so close together that they're in each other's near field. If you know what the near field is, it would definitely be bad if they were in each other's near field, but other than that, this is what we're going with. All of these are identical, and I have done some rudimentary calibration to make sure that none of them are defective. I've hooked them up to a pair of goggles, and I've looked at the RSSI that the goggle reports, and they're all roughly the same. Again, that's the kind of thing you could really get into the weeds on, trying to get an accurate number, but none of them is grossly or blatantly defective. They're hooked up to the goggles using some SMA cables. Each of them, that allows me to put them wherever they need to be while still having the modules and so forth where they need to be. All of these cables are identical. I bought them all at the same time. They all came from the same lot, and again, I tested them to find out if any of them were just grossly defective, and none of them are. But of course, obviously, I don't have the equipment to do a very, very fine test to make sure down to the 10th of a dB whether they're the same. Tough luck, that's what you got. Now, the fact that these cables are here is going to cause some additional attenuation. So the coverage that you're going to see in my test is going to be a little worse than you may see when I'm recording just from my goggles when I'm flying around, or previous tests that didn't involve these. But we're trying to see each one against the others, not necessarily the absolute best performance. I do need to say thank you to the folks who helped me get this stuff together. Some of this gear was provided by vendors. So for example, Furious FPV sent me the antennas. They provided those for me. Fat Shark provided me this set of goggles and that set of goggles. Of course, Iftron provided the ClearView. Banggood provided these DVRs for a previous test, actually. UBAD provided some modules. I think I've got everybody. I hope I haven't... Oh, Banggood provided the commanders as well. But also, much of this equipment I bought out of pocket. So the DVR I bought out of pocket. This is a $250 piece of equipment. And even little odds and ends like these cables, these are $7 a piece, and I have 20 of them. They really add up. So thanks to the vendors, thanks to my patrons as well, without whom I never would have spent $250 on this piece of gear just to get these stupid test results out. But thanks to them, and thanks to you guys who watch my videos, you also, the ad revenue from you guys adds up. Yeah, thanks to everybody for helping me get this gear together. All of the video is then fed into the back of this DVR. This is an 8-channel security camera DVR. And that way we know that all of the receiver modules are absolutely identical. We have no case where one might break up because it's just a little bit less sensitive than the others. It does keep recording when the signal goes to static. If it gets bad enough, it will go to black screen. But what I've done to avoid that, oh, and the other problem with it is security camera DVRs are notorious for going to low frame rates, especially when you're recording 8 channels at once. So you'll watch the playback and it'll be really stuttery, you know, because if you're playing a security camera, you don't need 8 frames per second to see, you know, what the guy broke into the car or whatever. So what I've done then is I'm feeding the screen from the security camera DVR out to one of these little DVRs, and that's what I'm recording. So I'm recording the live feed in full 30 frames per second, and that's going to be the master recording where we'll get the results. So even if there's a little bit of difference between what this DVR records and what it shows on screen, we will get exactly what it shows on screen. And of course this will not have any breakup at all because it's coming straight from this guy, right? Okay. We also have to acknowledge that what you're seeing on these screens is worse than what you see in your goggles, and that's just a fact. I've never seen anything that did as good a job of showing the image in real time as it does on the Fat Shark goggles, so kudos to Fat Shark for that. But again, we're just doing a side-by-side comparison. But if you're watching this, you're going, ooh, wow, there's a lot of breakup there. Part of that, again, is because we've got this additional attenuation from these cables, and part of that is because we're watching a DVR playback. But we've fixed all of the normal problems with DVR playback, such as time sync. This will all be completely synced, and such as dropped frames because it's getting played out to this guy here. And now I'm going to show you the results, but before I do, you need to know, number one, that the ATTITUDEV4 only has the Triumph antenna on it. All the other antennas in the test have both the Triumph antenna and the X-Air 10 dBi antenna, the directional antenna, because they have diversity, so they can switch back and forth between them as needs be. The whole test for the ATTITUDEV4 is being run only with the Triumph because it doesn't support diversity. And I feel a little bit okay about doing, I mean, that's unfair. It's got a handicap, but it's not my fault. It brought a knife to a gunfight, right? And I've heard some people, I don't know if they're officially Fat Shark representatives or whatever, but I've heard some people saying, you know what? The OLED module from Fat Shark is so freaking good, you don't even need diversity. How good is diversity really? Well, okay, let's take you at your word. Let's find out how good diversity is. So you'll be able... I think I just heard a firework go off. Welcome to living in the country, folks. So we'll find out just how good the Fat Shark stacks up without a directional antenna to all the other guys who do have a directional antenna. And that will be especially apparent in the first test where I fly straight out and back, and everybody else is going to be just dead in the center of their beam width of their directional antenna, and the Fat Shark is going to be struggling along. Well, or maybe it's not. Maybe it'll be, you'll see. The other thing you need to know is that the ClearView does not have a directional antenna. And I'm doing that because the ClearView is usually so freaking good that if we made it a fair fight, it would just mop the floor with everybody else. So the ClearView has only Omni antennas on it, and they're actually AXI antennas from Luminaire, not Triumphs, because I ran out of Triumphs. So the ClearView has 2 AXI Omni antennas, no directional antenna, and the Attitude has only 1 Triumph antenna, no directional antenna. And that is it. Let's get to the results. My experience is that it's a little hard to view 8 different results all at the same time and see what everybody is doing. So I've slowed this down to 50% speed to make it a little easier for you. I actually recommend you slow it down even further, maybe to 1/4 speed, using the YouTube playback speed option in the lower right. If you're on mobile, you don't have that option. But if you really hate this, you can go down and set the playback speed to 2x, and you can get it back up to full speed if that's what you prefer. An interesting exercise would be for you to compare the ClearView directly with the ATTITUDEV4. They are both in exactly the same situation in that they do not have a directional antenna. If the ClearView does better than the ATTITUDEV4, then that shows just how good the ClearView algorithm is. And if the ClearView does even close to as good as any of the other modules with the directional antenna, it's a freaking miracle. ClearView is at 2 dBi of antenna gain. The other modules are at 10 dBi of antenna gain. I also want to point out to you that while I was doing this test, I intentionally flew left and right on the road to try and eliminate any potential like a multipath null or some bad bounce of the signal. I didn't just fly straight line back and forth, but I flew around several times back and forth in a circle and also left to right on either side of the road to try and eliminate that as a possible cause of bad data. And that's going to be the end of that test. Basically, everything is clean right up to the point where I land. The next thing I did is I turned the antennas so that they were actually, in the past, what I've done is I've turned the antennas so they are pointing directly towards the basically the main area of my property. And what I found was that when I did that, basically all the modules just stayed on the directional antenna. They never used the omni antenna. It's 120-degree beam width on the antenna, so the whole property was basically in that beam width. So this time I oriented the directional antennas slightly off to the side of the property. So there was one side, when I'm coming from one side, I should be on the directional, but then when I fly back to the other side, I should be on the omni, and that should make the result. We should see some diversity switching, whereas before we really wouldn't. This section really highlights one of the things I like about the ClearView, which is that even when it gets almost completely no image, it still breaks up in a way that kind of retains the image. If you go back and watch that section again, you can, I'm not suggesting it was even remotely flyable, but you can still kind of see the outline of the trees there, whereas the others, the way they break up, it gets all jagged and broken, and it just becomes garbage. You can see right here, you can kind of see where the trees are. I mean, you would still crash, but the ClearView breaks up and degrades in a very flyable way when none of the other modules really do that. And I think it's unique to the ClearView and one reason why it really stands out. Right about here is where a diversity switch should happen. Coming from this direction, we're on the directional antenna, but as we come around here, we should transition off the directional to the omni. And that basically brings us to the end of this test. Did you figure out which one was the best? Obviously, it was the... Now I'm going to tell you about the quantitative way I came up with to score these results. And this is something that's always bugged me. Like, you just sort of watch it, and what if there are things that are making one module look worse than the other? Or what if just you happen to be looking at one module when it's breaking up and looking away when it's not? It's really hard to keep track of 8 different results all at once and say which one was the best. And then I thought, let's make it really freaking simple. Let's just say either the image is flyable or it's not flyable. Let's just make it binary. And that still involves some judgment, but it involves less judgment than if I had 4 levels, right? And so here I'm going to show you an example of a screen grab I took. And I would say for this one, like, it's really clear that the ATTITUDEV4 is not flyable. There's just nothing there. The CLEARVIEW, nothing there. The TrueD32, nothing there. The Commander, completely flyable. I would call that. The Achilles, completely flyable. The HUKIYA, rather. Sorry about that. It's a little broken up, but more broken up than the Commander, but still flyable. TrueD 3.5, getting on the edge here with the breakup at the top, but still flyable. And the LaForge, I would call that unflyable in this particular screenshot. Here's one more. In this one, we got a whole lot of them that are just clearly unflyable. But if we look at the HUKIYA, maybe that's unflyable. The LaForge might be just barely over the line of flyable. The TrueD, I don't know. This one is a little bit less clear. What I did is I stepped through each of these tests 1 second at a time. So I would start, I would skip ahead 1 second, and I would stop, and I would look at that frame. And in each frame, if the image was unflyable, I gave the module 1 point. So in this kind of scoring, lower scores are better, higher scores are worse, and here are the results that I came up with. So here are the results from the out and back test. This is the one where they were all on directional antennas except for the CLEARVIEW and the ATTITUDEV4. And the scores, well, we can see that the TrueD 3.2 did much worse at 28, a score of 28, compared to the others. The other modules seem to come in around 11, 15, 15, 17, 17, in that sort of range. And, you know, the TrueD 3.5 scored the lowest. That's the best score in this particular test. So for those of you who already are predisposed to be fans of the TrueD 3.5, you can be happy that yours won. And for those of you who are predisposed to dislike that module, frankly, it's just so close. There's still some subjectivity to it. It's so freaking close. 15, 11, 17. Frankly, anybody who wants to think that the LaForge, TrueD, HUKIYA, Commander, or Achilles 2.0, running on, by the way, real ACC hardware, any one of those could be considered to have done essentially equally as well as far as I'm concerned. But the clear losers here were the TrueD 3.2, and that is the 3.0 hardware running on 3.2 firmware, and the ClearView, which was only a loser because it went into the fight with a handicap, right? Okay. And the ATTITUDEV4, which also went into the fight with a handicap. So to those who say, oh, the Fat Shark OLED module is so freaking good, you don't need diversity, you don't need a directional antenna. Well, in this kind of test where the results are absolutely skewed toward needing a directional antenna, that's clearly not true. And that's not really a surprise. Obviously, directional antennas do better when you fly straight out in a line directly in their center of beam width. Duh, of course they do better. That's why we invented them. What about the second test where I was flying around and spent quite a lot of the time on the Omni antenna? Here are the results from that test. And we can see that the TrueD 3.5, the TrueD 3.2, the HUKIYA, the Commander, the ATTITUDEV4, and the Achilles 2.0, and the ClearView all did pretty much the same. They all did pretty well. And you know what? I'm not even going to try to go too far into the deep implications of what that means. I mean, basically, we did a test that really favored the directional antenna. And when we did that, the guys who didn't have a directional antenna did worse. And then we did a test that didn't particularly favor the directional antenna, and everybody did kind of the same. So is the takeaway that these modules all kind of perform more or less the same? Even the ClearView? I cannot accept that outcome. The ClearView is too freaking good. Something isn't right here. The other thing that will make some of you say something isn't right here is that the LaForge did so much freaking worse than everybody else in the second round of testing. And I don't know why that is. That is inconsistent with previous results. And it is definitely inconsistent with the preconceived notions of everyone who already owns a LaForge. Please tell me how good your module is. Tell me, you guys, how great your module is. But all I can say is I've done freaking everything I can think of to make these test results valid, all the way down to testing the receive signal strength of each antenna individually. And it just did worse, according to this particular metric. And there you go. So what, at the end of the day, should be the takeaway from this testing? My opinion, from looking at this footage until my eyes bleed, is that none of these modules dramatically outshone the others. Not even the ClearView, really, which kind of surprised me, because I would think in the second round of testing, at least, when it's more or less a fair comparison, that the ClearView would do much better. I've seen the ClearView do much better in many real-world conditions than the modules, and I'm surprised I didn't see it do better here, but the results are what they are. I'm also surprised that the LaForge didn't do better in the second round of testing. I don't know what caused that, but again, the results are what they are. But many of the modules that you would expect to kind of be an underdog, like the real ACC module, they didn't do dramatically worse than anything else. So I think any of these modules that you end up using, you're probably going to be happy with, at least in terms of RF performance. We'll do some more testing to test adjacent channel interference, which is another test I'm definitely going to run, and see if any of these, if you fly in very busy environments like races where there's a lot of pilots in the air, that could be definitely a make or break. That being said, I do think there are a few things you need to know before you pick one of these modules. And one of them is that the HUKIYA module, the firmware that comes on it is just the bog standard, RX 5808 firmware. It's with none of the better user interface and better, I mean, I don't know what they've done under the hood, if they've done anything, but at least as far as the user interface goes, it's just the absolute bare bones stuff. The same thing you would get on a real ACC if you were just to order it from Banggood. So I actually need to test to see if you can put the Achilles firmware on the HUKIYA module. Because if you like the form factor and the price of the HUKIYA module, but I don't think you should like the software that's on it. And having said that, Holy Bro will now come up with some new firmware and make all of this invalid. But for the time being, that's the way it stands. Also, between the TrueD 3.5 and the TrueD 3.0, the 3.5 definitely performed better, at least in the out and back testing. Not so much in the flying around diversity testing, but the 3.0 hardware was running 3.2 firmware, and you can install the 3.5 firmware on the 3.0 hardware. Do you get all that? So if you have the 3.0 hardware and you're not running 3.5, go ahead and upgrade it and see if that doesn't actually improve your performance. But it seems like, at least in one set of testing, that was another clear difference that we saw. I hope you've enjoyed all of this. Thanks for sticking with me. It's a ton of work getting this type of data out, but it's so rewarding to me to finally get it done and to finally be able to put the lie to some of these. You know, everybody's like, oh, mine is better, mine is better, mine is better. And I don't pretend for a minute that this testing is going to stop that, but it really is nice for me to be able to actually provide some concrete data. And if this doesn't put the final lie to it, because like, why did LaForge do so bad in the second round? I don't know. Well, it just means we need more testing, right? And now that I've got this awesome test rig, I can do that. Thank you for watching. Leave your comments, questions, and epithets in the comments. And as always, happy flying.